Commander Max Havoc Hudson wasn't worried about the warning lights. In his experience, which included surviving 3 shipwrecks, 2 alien invasions, and 1 particularly aggressive space raccoon, warning lights were more like suggestions. Besides, his cargo hold was full of premium coffee beans from New Brazil colony, and he'd promised delivery to Mars base within the next 24 hours. A few blinking red lights weren't going to stop him from getting his hazard pay bonus. "Commander Hudson!" Pip's crisp voice cut through the cockpit's ambient hum. "I feel compelled to remind you that ignoring Class 3 engine warnings violates approximately 17 different space safety protocols." "Only 17? Havoc adjusted his well-worn leather jacket and propped his boots up on the console. "I must be losing my touch." 19 now, Pip corrected. "Your feet on the console violate regulations 23B and 47C. Havoc grinned at the glowing blue orb that represented his ship's AI. After 3 years together, PIP's attempts to enforce proper spacecraft operation had evolved from genuine concern to what Havoc liked to call sarcastic mother henning. The AI might complain, but they both knew Pip enjoyed their adventures far more than standard cargo runs. "Look, those engine warnings are probably just residual data from when we scraped past that asteroid field last week." Havoc waved dismissively at the blinking console. "The Stellar Shenanigans is a tough old girl. She's fine. The ship's name alone violates Regulation 12A. All vessels must maintain professional designations appropriate to their function." Pip's orb pulsed with each word. "And might I remind you that we scraped past that asteroid field because you insisted on taking a shortcut through a clearly marked mining zone? Hey, we saved 6 hours and only lost 1 minor sensor array. We lost 3 arrays and the backup coffee maker. The coffee maker was already broken. Because you tried to brew engine coolant in it last month." Havoc was about to defend his experimental approach to spacecraft maintenance when a new alarm started blaring. This one was different, deeper, more urgent, and accompanied by a violent shudder that rattled his teeth. "Okay, that's new." He swung his feet off the console and leaned forward. "PIP, what are we looking at?" "Calculating." The AI's blue orb swirled with complex patterns. "Commander, I'm detecting a massive gravitational disturbance directly ahead. Multiple objects emerging from hyperspace." The space in front of them twisted, reality folding in on itself like a cosmic origami project gone wrong. Havoc's hands flew across the controls, already plotting evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. The void erupted with light, and suddenly the Stellar Shenanigans was surrounded by the biggest collection of alien ships he'd ever seen. They were beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. Each vessel looked like it had been grown rather than built, with organic curves and iridescent surfaces that reminded Havoc of the beetle collections his grandmother used to keep. The smallest was about the size of an Earth cruiser, while the largest— "PP, please tell me that's not a flagship." "That is not a flagship," Pip replied dutifully. "It appears to be a mobile hive cluster of the Nixithrax Empire, measuring approximately 47.3 kilometers in length. And might I add that we are now in violation of Regulation 89D. Unauthorized first contact with previously unknown species is strictly prohibited." Havoc watched as smaller ships began to emerge from the massive hive vessel, moving with the coordinated grace of insects protecting their queen. "Any chance they haven't spotted us yet?" A beam of purple light suddenly engulfed their ship, freezing them in place. "Negative, Commander, we are being hailed." "Well?" Havoc straightened his jacket and flashed his most charming smile at the communications screen. "Guess we better say hello. Open a channel, Pip, and maybe don't mention that thing with the engine coolant coffee maker. First impressions and all that." "Opening channel," Pip sighed, "and updating my list of violations accordingly." The purple beam holding the Stellar Shenanigans transformed into a high-definition hologram that filled the entire cockpit. Havoc found himself face to face with what appeared to be a 9-foot-tall praying mantis wearing enough jewelry to bankrupt a small planet. "Greetings, tiny mammal vessel," the mantis buzzed in surprisingly good English. "I am Queen Vexitara of the Nixithrax Hive. You have entered our sacred migration space. Prepare for immediate disintegration." Havoc raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty aggressive opening line. Have you considered something more traditional, like take me to your leader or we come in peace? The Queen's compound eyes shifted through several shades of purple. You dare to critique my first contact protocols? Not critiquing, just suggesting. Havoc leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual disregard for imminent death. I mean, jumping straight to disintegration? That's like asking someone to marry you before the first date. Commander, Pip's voice carried a note of panic, might I suggest not antagonizing the giant insectoid alien who holds our molecular structure in her appendages? Queen Vexitara clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Your artificial intelligence shows appropriate fear, yet you display none. Explain. Oh, Pip's just programmed to worry. It's their favorite hobby, right after citing regulations. Havoc winked at the Queen. Speaking of hobbies, that's some impressive jewelry you're wearing. Really brings out the deadly spikes on your exoskeleton. The Queen's antennae twitched. The massive fleet around them shifted position, and several smaller ships backed away nervously. Commander Hudson, Pip whispered, according to the limited xenobiological data I'm receiving, complementing a Nyxothrax Queen's defensive features is considered... You find my battle spikes attractive, Queen Vexitara interrupted, her voice rising an octave. Sure, they're very pointy, Havoc gestured enthusiastically. And that stinger? Magnificent. Bet you could impale a small moon with that beauty. The Queen's colour shifted to a deep magenta. You observe my weapons of war and see beauty? You face certain death and respond with flattery? She turned to address someone off-screen. Record this interaction. It appears we have found something interesting. Oh no, Pip muttered. Oh yes, the Queen purred. Tell me, bold one, are all humans so delightfully reckless? Nah, I'm one of a kind. Havoc flashed his trademark grin. Just ask my superiors. They've got a file on me thicker than your thorax. Commander, Pip tried again. The Queen's changing colour patterns indicate either intense rage or... Passion, Queen Vexitara declared. The hologram zoomed in until her massive head filled the cockpit. In all my centuries of conquering the galaxy, no species has ever dared to admire my weapons so openly. Your complete disregard for protocol and self-preservation is most arousing. Havoc's grin faltered slightly. I'm sorry, what? By the ancient laws of the Nyxothrax Hive, any being brave or foolish enough to complement a queen's death-dealing capabilities must be evaluated as a potential mate. She clicked her mandibles excitedly. Congratulations, tiny human. You have initiated the sacred courtship ritual. The fleet around them began to move in complex patterns, forming what Pip's rapid analysis identified as traditional Nyxothrax mating dance formations. Now wait just a minute. Havoc held up his hands. I was just trying to avoid being disintegrated. There's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, the Queen's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, would be refusing my generous offer. The last being who rejected a queen's courtship was fed to our ceremonial space wasps, very slowly. What my commander means to say, Pip interjected smoothly, is that human courtship rituals are complex and must be performed in a specific order. It would be disrespectful to skip the traditional steps. Queen Vexitara's antennae perked up. Other rituals? Do tell. Yes, dozens of them. Havoc caught on quickly. Very important rituals. Can't possibly skip them. Wouldn't want to disrespect your royal spikiness. Then you shall return with me to the Hive cluster, the Queen declared. We will begin these rituals immediately. I look forward to learning all about human mating customs. She paused thoughtfully, particularly the ones involving your species' fascinating pain tolerance. That's very flattering, Havoc began, already plotting escape vectors in his head. But I've got this very important coffee delivery and... Silence! The Queen's voice boomed through the cockpit. You will be escorted to my personal docking bay. Any attempt to flee will be considered a declaration of eternal devotion, as per Nyxothrax tradition. I do so hope you try to run. She clicked her mandibles in what might have been an attempt at a flirtatious manner. I enjoy hunting down my mates almost as much as I enjoy decorating my chamber with their preserved remains." The hologram vanished, leaving Havoc and Pip in stunned silence. "Commander," Pip finally spoke, "I believe this situation has escalated beyond the scope of standard safety regulations." "You think?" Havoc's fingers flew across the controls. "Plot us a course out of here. Something crazy." "Might I remind you that the Queen specifically said escape attempts would be interpreted as better eternal devotion than eternal preservation." Havoc yanked the controls hard. "Time to do what I do best. Violate regulations and make terrible decisions?" "Exactly." The Stellar Shenanigans engines roared to life. "Now help me figure out how to outrun a love-struck alien queen before she adds me to her collection of historical boyfriends." The Stellar Shenanigans burst into motion like a caffeinated jackrabbit, diving between two massive Nixithrax cruisers with inches to spare. "Your escape trajectory violates at least 27 different flight safety protocols," PIP announced as they barrel-rolled past a swarm of smaller ships. "Only 27? Come on, we can do better than that." Havoc spun the ship through a gap that technically shouldn't have been wide enough to fit through. "How many violations if I do this?" The ship flipped end over end, using its own momentum to slingshot around a passing asteroid. Behind them, several Nixithrax pursuit vessels slammed into each other, trying to follow the maneuver. 43 violations and counting," Pip replied. "Also, the Queen is broadcasting again. Audio only this time." "My clever little mammal," Queen Vexitara's voice filled the cockpit, somehow managing to sound both menacing and flirtatious. "Such aggressive piloting, such blatant disregard for basic physics. You're making me dizzy with desire." "That's not the only thing making me dizzy," Havoc muttered, yanking the controls to avoid a volley of what appeared to be organic grappling hooks. "PIP, please tell me you found us a way out of here." "There appears to be a dense asteroid field approximately 40 seconds ahead. The Queen's larger ships won't be able to follow." "Perfect. What's the catch?" "The field is technically a protected breeding ground for space whales." "Of course it is." Havoc punched the throttle. "How many regulations would flying through a space whale nursery violate?" "I've stopped counting," Pip replied dryly. "I believe we've transcended mere violations and entered the realm of regulatory apocalypse." They dove into the asteroid field just as another wave of grappling hooks sailed past. The space whales, massive bioluminescent creatures that looked like a cross between Earth cetaceans and deep-sea anglerfish, bellowed their displeasure as the Stellar Shenanigans weaved between their breeding pods. "Sorry about the disturbance," Havoc called out, though the whales couldn't possibly hear him. "Just passing through, running from an arranged marriage, you know how it is." "Commander," Pip's voice took on a worryingly serious tone, "we have another problem. Worse than an amorous alien queen and angry space whales. Admiral Diana Rulebook Chen is hailing us from the EFS regulation." Havoc groaned. "What's the most uptight admiral in Earth's fleet doing out here?" "According to her transmission, she was conducting a routine inspection of the whale sanctuary when our little diplomatic incident began." PIP paused. "She seems displeased." The communication screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Chen. Her perfectly pressed uniform and severe bun made Havoc feel scruffy just by looking at her. "Commander Hudson," she said, each syllable precisely enunciated. "Would you care to explain why I'm receiving reports of a human vessel violating 16 different protected species regulations while simultaneously provoking a Class A alien civilization into a courtship frenzy?" "Only 16? Havoc managed a weak smile. "I really am losing my touch. This is not a joke, Commander. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Nixithrax Hive controls half the known galaxy's supply of antimatter. We've been trying to establish diplomatic relations for decades, and you—" She paused, reading something off-screen. "You complimented the Queen's deadly appendages and then ran away." "In my defense, I was trying to avoid being disintegrated at the time." "Return to my embrace, my spirited prey," Queen Vexitara's voice boomed across all channels. Your resourceful escape only inflames my passion." Admiral Chen's eye twitched. "Commander Hudson, as the ranking officer in this sector, I am ordering you to surrender yourself to the Nixithrax immediately. Perhaps if we handle this diplomatically, we can avoid an interstellar incident." "With all due respect, Admiral," Havoc replied, deftly steering around a particularly grumpy-looking space whale. "I've seen the Queen's collection of preserved ex-boyfriends. Diplomatic relations aren't really her strong suit." "That wasn't a request, Commander. The EFS regulation is moving to intercept you. You will stand down and—" The Admiral's transmission cut off as the stellar shenanigans dove behind a large asteroid, temporarily blocking communications. "PIP, please tell me you've got a better idea than surrendering to either the regulation-obsessed Admiral or the murderous Space Mantis Queen." "Actually," Pip's orb pulsed thoughtfully, "I believe I do, but you're not going to like it. Hit me. According to my analysis of Nixithrax cultural data, there is one way to legally reject a Queen's courtship advances without triggering an automatic death sentence." "I'm listening." "The suitor must prove themselves unworthy through a series of increasingly dangerous ritual challenges." Pipe's tone became suspiciously cheerful. "Failure at any point results in immediate execution, but successful completion of all challenges allows for a graceful exit from the courtship process." Havoc stared at his AI companion. "So my choices are certain death by preservation, certain court-martial by Admiral Chen, or probable death by ritual challenge?" "Correct. Though I should note that Admiral Chen's punishments typically don't involve actual death, just soul-crushing amounts of paperwork." Another volley of grappling hooks shot past the viewport, followed by the distinctive sound of space whale mating calls. "Right," Havoc straightened his jacket. "Ritual challenges it is. How do we start? First, we need to acquire several gallons of Earth's spiciest hot sauce." PIP somehow managed to make its glowing orb look smug. "I hope you're not afraid of capsaicin, Commander. This is going to require industrial quantities." "I hate you so much right now." "I know. Shall I plot a course to Earth? I believe we're only violating about 60 regulations at this point. We might as well go for an even 100. Behind them, the combined forces of the Nixithrax Hive and Earth fleet emerged from the asteroid field, led by a love-struck queen and a very angry admiral. Havoc sighed. "Make it so, Pip, and hey, at least we're not bored anymore." "No, Commander, we are, however, completely out of coffee." "Let me get this straight," Dr. Marcus Wong said, adjusting his safety goggles as he stared at the mountain of hot sauce bottles covering his laboratory floor. "You want to challenge an alien queen's courtship ritual using my personal collection of extreme hot sauces?" "Technically, we're trying to fail the challenge." Havoc picked up a bottle labeled Supernova Death Wish, medical waiver required. "PIP says the Nixithrax have highly sensitive chemoreceptors. One drop of this stuff should prove I'm not worthy mate material. The Queen's biological scans indicate a particularly acute sensitivity to capsaicin," Piep added helpfully from a borrowed lab speaker. "Dr. Wong's collection represents our best chance of surviving this situation with minimal casualties and only moderate chemical burns." Dr. Wong reverently lifted a tiny vial of glowing red liquid from a reinforced case. "You realize some of these sources are technically classified as biological weapons in certain systems." "Perfect." Havoc reached for the vial. Wong pulled it away. "That wasn't a recommendation. This one literally melted through a safety vault last year. We had to evacuate the entire research wing." "Even better." Havoc grinned. "How much do you need for the whole collection?" "Oh, I'm not selling them." Wong's eyes gleamed with scientific enthusiasm. "I'm coming with you. Do you have any idea how valuable the data from this experiment could be? The first documented case of human Nixithrax capsaicin interaction." "Absolutely not." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the lab as she strode in, flanked by 2 armed guards. "Nobody is going anywhere near the Nixithrax with unauthorized chemical weapons." "They're not weapons," Wong protested. "They're artisanal culinary experiments. Your experiments triggered 3 different hazmat alerts just by being opened." The Admiral glared at the collection. "This entire operation is now under military jurisdiction. Commander Hudson, you are under arrest for—" She was interrupted by an insistent beeping from her communicator. The color drained from her face as she read the message. "Problem?" Havoc asked innocently. "The Nixithrax Queen has just declared that any interference with her chosen mate's ritual challenges will be considered an act of war." Chen's eye twitched again. "She's backing this up with 300 heavily armed Hive ships currently surrounding Earth." "Only 300? Wong looked disappointed. The historical record suggested they usually deploy at least 500 for a proper courtship fleet. "This is not helping, Doctor." Chen began pacing. "The Joint Chiefs are having collective aneurysms, the diplomatic corps is in chaos, and the space whales have filed a formal complaint about noise pollution during their mating season. I have a suggestion," PIP chimed in. "Given that we cannot avoid the ritual challenges without triggering either war or Commander Hudson's preservation as a romantic trophy, perhaps we should focus on controlling the circumstances of our inevitable failure." Chen stopped pacing. "Explain." "The Nixithrax value spectacle above all else. If we orchestrate a sufficiently impressive display of incompatibility, the Queen might be convinced to withdraw her suit voluntarily." "You want to turn this disaster into an even bigger spectacle?" Chen looked horrified. "Exactly." Havoc snapped his fingers. "We're not running away from the courtship ritual. We're putting on a show, one that ends with the Queen deciding I'm not worth the trouble." "And my hot sauces," Wong asked hopefully, "will be the grand finale." Havoc turned to Chen. "Admiral, you can either arrest me and start an interstellar war, or help us put on the greatest failed courtship display in galactic history." Chen stared at the ceiling for a long moment, probably counting regulation violations in her head. Finally she sighed. "The things I do for peace, fine, but this goes by the book." What book would that be?" Wong asked, already packing his most dangerous sauces. "We'll write it as we go," Havoc replied. "PP, what's first on the traditional Nixithrax courtship challenge list?" "Normally the suitor must demonstrate their warrior prowess by defeating the Queen's champion in ritual combat." "Great, and how do we make sure I lose without dying?" "That's the interesting part." Pip's tone turned suspiciously cheerful again. "The combat takes place in null gravity, using traditional Nixithrax battle poetry as weapons." There was a moment of stunned silence. "I'm sorry," Havoc said slowly. "Did you say battle poetry?" "Indeed, the Nixithrax believe that true warriors can cause physical damage through creative metaphors and aggressive alliteration." Wong looked delighted. "Fascinating. Their neural structures must be incredibly sensitive to linguistic stimuli." "Which means," Pip continued, "that when we eventually deploy Dr. Wong's hot sauces, the effect should be rather spectacular." Chen rubbed her temples. "I can't believe I'm asking this, but what exactly do you need from the military to support this insanity?" Havoc grinned. "How do you feel about converting the International Space Station into a zero-gravity poetry slam arena, while simultaneously setting up the largest hot sauce taste-testing event in human history?" Wong added. "Both of which will be broadcast live across the galaxy," Pip concluded. Chen's eye twitched one final time. "I'm going to need so much paperwork for this." "Look on the bright side, Admiral," Havoc said, carefully packing away the hot sauce labelled "Satan's Revenge, warranty void if opened. At least we're not bored anymore." "Speak for yourself," she muttered. "Some of us miss being bored." "Then you're really not going to like Phase 2, Pip announced cheerfully. "That's the part where we teach the Queen's Honor Guard to dance the Macarena." The sound of Admiral Chen's head hitting her desk was drowned out by Dr. Wong's enthusiastic suggestions for choreography. The modified International Space Station hung in low Earth orbit like a disco ball having an identity crisis. Holographic displays projected the proceedings to the gathered Nixithrax fleet, while Earth's combined military forces tried to look both intimidating and diplomatic, a task made considerably harder by the fact that half of them were now wearing novelty hot sauce-themed T-shirts. "I can't believe this is actually happening," Admiral Chen muttered, watching as maintenance crews finished installing the zero-gravity poetry combat arena. "Oh, it gets better," Dr. Wong said cheerfully, arranging his hot sauce collection in order of ascending lethality. Wait until you see the interpretive dance number I choreographed for the honor guard. In the preparation chamber, Havoc was trying to memorize what PIP assured him was the worst poetry in human history. Vogan poetry would have been more effective, PIP commented, but apparently it's restricted under the Geneva Convention. How thoughtful of them! Havoc adjusted his ceremonial spacesuit, which someone had decorated with chili pepper decals. Run me through the plan one more time. Phase 1. You challenge the Queen's champion to poetry combat. Your deliberately terrible verses, combined with interpretive dance from the honor guard, should significantly diminish your attractiveness as a potential mate. And if that doesn't work? Phase 2. Dr. Wong's hot sauce tasting ceremony. We've arranged the samples from mildly uncomfortable to, and I quote, "Oh God, why does it feel like my soul is melting?" The station's announcement system crackled to life. Would all participants in Operation Hot Date please report to their stations? The Nix-Thrax royal delegation is arriving. Queen Vexitara's entrance put every Hollywood diva to shame. Her personal shuttle, which looked like a crystalline praying mantis the size of a football field, docked with the station in a shower of bioluminescent spores. "My reluctant beloved," her voice boomed through every speaker, "I await your pathetic attempts to prove yourself unworthy." "That's my cue." Havoc took a deep breath. "How do I look?" "Like someone who's about to make a terrible mistake," Chen replied. "Perfect, that's exactly what I was going for." The Queen's champion turned out to be a 12-foot-tall warrior poet named Krizit, whose carapace was carved with what Pip identified as particularly aggressive haikus. "Behold," Queen Vexitara announced from her observation pod, "the ritual of poetic combat begins. Should you survive, we shall proceed to the taste trial." Krizit raised all four of his arms and began to recite, "Mighty is the hive, like stellar winds through cosmic dust, oh, your defeat brings joy." The verse hit Havoc like a physical force, sending him spinning through the zero-gravity arena. Behind him, several potted plants withered and died. "Your turn, tiny mammal," Kriz clicked menacingly. Havoc steadied himself and launched into his prepared verse. "Roses are red, violets are blue, and I've got the romantic appeal of a moldy shoe." There was a collective gasp from the Nix-Thrax observers. Several of them clutched their antennae in physical pain. Christ actually backed away. "What manner of anti-poetry is this?" the champion demanded. Havoc grinned and continued, "There once was a queen from deep space who thought my face was quite ace, but I'm really quite boring, and my jokes set mine snoring, and my dance moves are quite a disgrace." To demonstrate this last point, the honor guard burst into their carefully rehearsed routine, a horrifying mixture of the Macarena, the chicken dance, and what Wong insisted was interpretive contemporary jazz. Queen Vexitara's compound eyes shifted rapidly through several colors. "Enough! Your poetry is indeed terrible, but your bravery in presenting such awful verses only makes you more appealing. We shall proceed to the taste trial." "That's our cue," Wong said, wheeling forward his hot sauce cart. "I've saved the best for last. My own creation, the quantum apocalypse sauce. It's got a Scoville rating that technically doesn't exist in this dimension." "Commander," Pip interjected, "the Queen's biological scans suggest her chemoreceptors are approximately 1,000 times more sensitive than we initially calculated." Meaning? Meaning Dr. Wong's source collection might be slightly more effective than intended. Before Havoc could process this warning, Queen Vexitara had already sampled the first, mildest hot sauce. Her reaction was immediate and spectacular. The Queen's exoskeleton changed colors so rapidly it created a strobe effect. Her antennae curled into perfect spirals, then straightened with enough force to puncture the ceiling. A sound emerged from her mandibles that Pip would later describe as the auditory equivalent of a nuclear explosion having an existential crisis. "What manner of chemical warfare is this?" she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that shattered several observation windows. "Oh, that was just the mild sauce," Wong said helpfully. "Would you like to try the medium?" The Queen's honor guard moved to protect her, but they were too late. The ventilation system had already spread a fine mist of capsaicin throughout the station. The resulting chaos looked like a documentary about raving mantis aliens directed by a caffeine-addicted Michael Bay. "I think," Havoc observed as they watched the Queen's flagship execute what appeared to be an emergency backflip, "we might have slightly overdone it." Admiral Chen, watching Earth's first official contact with the Nyx-Thrax dissolve into a hot sauce-induced panic, just sighed. "You think?" 3 weeks after what historians would later call the Great Hot Sauce Incident, Commander Max Havoc Hudson stood before the Earth Federation Council, trying not to smile as Admiral Chen read out his official reprimand. "Furthermore," she continued, her eye twitch now a permanent feature, "the defendants' actions resulted in 17 new intergalactic regulations, 12 trade agreements, and the classification of Earth as a restricted biological weapons research facility." "In my defense," Havoc interjected, "we did avoid war with the Nyx-Thrax, only because Queen Vexitara was too busy decontaminating her fleet to declare one." Chen shuffled her papers. "It took 3 days just to get the smell of hot sauce out of the International Space Station. Dr. Wong is still receiving angry letters from the cleaning crew." "Speaking of Wong," Havoc glanced around the chamber, "where is our spicy food enthusiast?" "Currently giving a guest lecture to the Nyx-Thrax Science Academy," PIP answered from a nearby console. "Apparently they're fascinated by humanity's ability to voluntarily consume chemical weapons for pleasure. He's become something of a celebrity in their scientific community." Chen nodded. "Which brings us to the most unexpected outcome of this disaster. Queen Vexitara's official declaration." She pressed a button and a hologram of the Queen appeared. Her carapace still showed faint traces of red staining, but her posture was regal as ever. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy," the recording announced, "that humans are officially classified as a Class X species, too insane to interact with safely. Their ability to weaponize common condiments, their enthusiasm for terrible poetry, and their complete disregard for proper courtship protocols make them simultaneously fascinating and terrifying." The Queen's antennae twitched at what was presumably a traumatic memory. "Furthermore, Earth is hereby designated as the Spicy Planet, and shall be given a minimum safe distance of 3 star systems by all sensible species. Any civilization foolish enough to attempt invasion should be aware that humans consider military-grade chemical irritants a casual snack." The hologram flickered off. "So," Havoc grinned, "mission accomplished." Chen pinched the bridge of her nose. "In recognition of your unique contribution to interstellar diplomacy, the Council has decided to both commend and punish you." "How does that work?" "You're being promoted to Special Diplomatic Liaison for Unconventional First Contact Scenarios." Chen somehow managed to make it sound like a threat. "You'll be handling all our weird alien situations from now on." "I'm honored," Havoc said, trying to look solemn and failing miserably. "Though I have to ask, was any of this actually in the regulations?" "It is now." Chen handed him a thick manual. "We've had to create an entirely new section. Protocol 47H, the Hot Sauce Doctrine." "Commander," Pip interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Sector 7. "What now?" "Apparently a collective of sentient gas clouds has taken an interest in Earth's collection of bubble wrap. They find the popping sound spiritually enlightening." Chen's eye twitched harder. "Don't even think about it, Hudson." Too late. Havoc was already heading for the door. "PIP, warm up the stellar shenanigans. I've got some ideas about interpretive bubble wrap poetry." "I hate this job," Chen muttered, but there was the faintest hint of a smile on her face. Back aboard his ship, Havoc settled into the familiar comfort of his pilot's chair. "You know, Pip, I can't help feeling like this whole thing worked out a little too perfectly." "Whatever do you mean, Commander?" "The Queen's biological data being just detailed enough to suggest hot sauce as a solution. Dr. Wong's convenient collection, even Admiral Chen showing up at exactly the right moment." He eyed Pip's glowing orb suspiciously. "Almost like someone planned it." "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." Pip's light pulsed innocently. "Though I should mention that my new quantum processing upgrade, approved as part of the diplomatic incident budget, is working splendidly. You orchestrated this whole thing for an upgrade? Commander, I am shocked and appalled by such an accusation. Piep's tone was pure artificial sweetness. Though I do believe the Bubble Wrap Collective is expecting us. Shall we? Havoc laughed and fired up the engines. You know what? I don't even care. At least we're not bored anymore. Indeed, though we are once again out of coffee. Set course for New Brazil Colony and Pip. Yes, Commander. Next time you want an upgrade, maybe just ask. Now where would be the fun in that? The stellar shenanigans shot off into the stars, leaving behind a galaxy that would never quite look at hot sauce the same way again. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, a very traumatized alien queen was probably still trying to get the taste of quantum apocalypse sauce out of her mandibles. As for Commander Hudson, well, he had bubble wrap poetry to compose. The galaxy wasn't going to weird itself up after all.